Hi, this is Justin, aka retrorhythms. When I was growing up, I took a huge interest in music from a very early age. My mom often tells the story of when I was about 2 years old getting a blue Fisher Price record player and being mesmerized by the spinning of the record on there. And perhaps because when she was pregnant with me, she listened to Donna Summer a lot, and I happened to be wearing my Donna Summer t shirt from a 1996 concert I attended of the late great divas. Uh, she was one of my very first favorites, and in fact, most of my first favorite artists that I remember as a very young boy were African American artists, particularly in the R&B and disco styles. I have clear memories of being in the car riding home from my pre-kindergarten class, hearing Evelyn Champagne King's "Love Come Down" and enjoying that. And Pointer Sisters were a big part of my listening diet early on. Um, Several years ago, when I had the opportunity to interview both Anita and Ruth, I joked with Ruth how when I read her autobiography, Still So Excited, I kind of chuckled because she said in there that when she met her husband, one of the first songs he mentioned to her as being familiar to him with the group was American music and how that had been such a non favorite of the groups. And I so related to his experience because I loved that song growing up. And now in retrospect, I can see what she kind of meant about it, but it is funny too because years later, when I lived in New York and volunteered, or I should say, kind of worked for a nonprofit called Hospital Audiences. I sang that song as part of my program that I did for some of the people in mental outpatient facilities. So I actually love that song, but I'm getting in a little diatribe that's not really related. This is supposed to be just my story in a nutshell. And moving ahead in my story, um, in the music video era, which I was kind of born into, I guess you could say, although MTV was definitely a part of it, I can definitively say, and this will not surprise any of my subscribers, that BET was a much larger part of my music video diet when I was growing up. So much of the music that I bought as a kid in the local record stores with my allowance was because of the videos that I was introduced to via Video Soul with Donnie Simpson, Video Vibrations, Video LP, Soft Notes, Heart and Soul, In Your Ear, Planet Groove later on. Gosh, so many of them. There's probably a few more that I'm forgetting. They had so many of them because they back then showed music videos. I would say at least a good 80 to 85% of the 24 hours that they were on. So that was a huge influence. And I was fortunate because my dad had a business in the Hampton Roads area where we grew up, and he had some connections with local businesses. And one of the gentlemen at a radio station that was quite prominent there called 103 Jams, I don't remember his name, he had suggested to my dad that as enthusiastic as I was about music, that I should publish a music magazine. And I didn't really think much about the idea, but a few months later, I believe it was, or less than a year, when I was 13, I was at home one Sunday without a lot to do. And I wasn't an outcast, but I wasn't like hugely social, like with the in crowd or anything. I thought, well, I should try this. And I did my first issue kind of in a day, wrote it myself. Now, keep in mind, I was kind of gleaned on Billboard magazine. It was a bar mitzvah gift, a subscription to it. A generous coworker of my dad's got that for me. I read it religiously for a good at least half dozen years. And that and several other publications really informed my beginnings as a music journalist. So I had written one review for the middle school newspaper, and it was a review of Mariah Carey's Emotions album in the late fall of 1991. And then in February of 1992, I did the first issue of what was the hip key, which I would do for 4 years, a little over 4 years. It was very successful for me. It took a while. We tried different formats. It started out very basic, but evolved into something that was quite professional looking and professionally printed. And I had the able assistance eventually of an advertising agency with a wonderful lady named Cheryl Dozier who helped me give it a very professional look. And I was able to, with the help of friends, distribute it to many local record stores, clothing stores at malls, restaurants, etc. Any place that would stock free publications. That was a great era for that. I can remember getting up early on Black Friday. I believe it was in 1994 when we had kind of first started this new professional look and taking this magazine around. Now, I have some clips on my channel relating to that magazine, but to give you a general idea, the slogan was a review of today's hottest new music. When I started it, I mostly covered R&B, dance, and a little bit of pop. As it expanded, we eventually got to a distribution of about 10,000 throughout Virginia. I grew to include coverage of other styles such as jazz, country, alternative rock, gospel, even classical. And whereas I initially had done most of the writing myself, I eventually had assistance from everyone from my choir teacher, Miss Tolliver, to my voice teacher, and Miss Labedia, she was known at the time, but her name is Emily Stouch, and she is a wonderful performer and instructor. And my friend Molly from high school, she wrote a column, and another young lady named Marie LeBud. So it was quite a fun experience. I really enjoyed it because not only did I write reviews, but eventually I had a lot of interviews in the magazine. And my first interviewing experiences really were via that. And Cyndi Lauper was the first big name artist that I got to interview. And these were phone interviews. And that's very memorable to me. Those clips are on my channel from that interview. The audio, luckily, I taped it on a cassette and saved it. But I remember her publicist calling the day of the interview to say, "Oh, she's running a little bit behind. She's finishing up Oprah, but she'll be calling in about 30 minutes or so." So those are good memories. And 1996, it was kind of when the internet was first becoming more in people's homes in the United States, and I think I had just kind of burned out a little bit, and there was not really an endless supply of money. So I had thought about taking the magazine online because it wasn't practical to keep printing it. It was getting expensive. But I guess it was a combination of being a little bit tired and having senioritis because I was entering my 12th grade year and had other things on my mind. So it did not continue. But I was very fortunate that I was able to go to Berklee College of Music and study with great people such as Walter Beasley, Donna McElroy, Skylar Trauber. My goodness, there were so many people in different areas of music, whether it was the performance theory, other aspects. And I majored in music business there, but I did study voice. And the things I learned from Donna McElroy, I am so grateful for because I use them to this day. And I remember back in the late 90s when I first met her at the Berkeley bookstore, and I hadn't studied with her yet. And I said, "Oh, I love your song Part of Me. I have the video recorded from BET back in the day," because already then it had been a few years. And she said, "Oh, that's so awesome. Can you make a copy for me?" So, this was obviously pre-YouTube. So it was just such a joy to get to study with people that I knew and loved. Many of them I did not know of before, but they just enriched my musical abilities so much. So after graduating from Berkeley, it was a bit of a rude awakening, especially at that time, because I don't think the music business program had quite developed into what it perhaps is now. But I did move to Manhattan for a couple years. I was there shortly before 9/11 when I first moved there, actually. And even though that was such a stunning thing to happen, aside from the tragedy itself, I just think it was all still so overwhelming to me being there, um, that it actually gave me a little more impetus to just make the most out of my living in New York City experience. Ultimately, I did not find it financially feasible or really as effective in establishing my career goals or achieving them, I should say. But highlights of living there included, again, these are things you can kind of get little taste of on my YouTube channel, Ashford and Simpson's Sugar Bar, where I met so many wonderful singers that I had loved for many years and got to either be introduced by them or interview them or even perform with them. One of my earliest posts on YouTube is my performance there of Ashford Simpson's It's My House, which of course was made famous by Diana Ross, but Valerie Simpson accompanied me. I had asked her, I said, I really want to do a song with you and one that I love. And that was one that other people I had not seen perform. So I'm very grateful for those experiences. In addition to, like, even in that performance alone, I remember the late, great Lolita Holloway was in the audience cheering me on. And then there were other venues that I frequented not quite as much, like Cafe Wah, where I got to be backed up by the wonderful Cheryl Pepsi Riley when I sang Shirley and Company's Shame, Shame, Shame. So New York was very challenging ultimately. I was kind of probably not knowing I might be on the verge of a nervous breakdown, but I had a lot of wonderful learning experiences personally and semi professionally at least. And then I moved to Los Angeles. I mean, talk about night and day. I just didn't click with me at the time that, hello, this is probably going to be extremely hard going out on my own there and not really knowing anybody. But I tried my hand there, and I did get some fun performing experiences, not really on the level of what I did in New York, but I ended up spending most of my time working as a guest services associate or front desk clerk, depending on how you want to call it, at a Marriott out there. But it was, again, quite a learning experience. To this day, there are things from Los Angeles that I was a little bit clearer by the time I got out there because it wasn't as frenetic, and I had a really hard time with it because I felt very isolated, and the culture was totally different than anything I ever knew on the East Coast. But I got to learn more about myself and a few artists as well. The late great Viola Wills came to visit. She's from Los Angeles. She was from Los Angeles originally, but she was living overseas at that point. But she came by, and there's a video on my channel. You can see her in the apartment I had at the time, singing one of her lesser known gems called Keep On Coming that she wrote. So it was worthwhile. So I've been generally back in the Virginia and DC area in the years since. Um, and luckily, after a long dormant period of music journalism for me, I had written for the All Music Guide for a number of years remotely. Before that was really a term. But I, in 2009, resumed my journalistic activities, and I have to thank David Nathan, the great blues and soul American correspondent and label owner of Soul Music Records, for allowing me that re-entry. I had written and even interned for him a couple times over the years between when I was in New York and living in Los Angeles where he resided for a while. So I wanted to do a tribute actually to Viola Wills because she passed away in 2009. And from then on, he asked me to contribute to the soulmusic.com website, earlier version than what's there now because most of those articles are not any longer on the website. But I got to do many wonderful interviews, many of which you can hear excerpts of on this channel. And started writing for Blog Critics, which is a great site that I get to write for occasionally to this day. And in 2012, I took a chance and reached out to Soul Tracks, which was a site that I was very fond of and already had quite the reputation because they had started in 2003. So luckily, I was able to connect with Chris there and have been writing for them for over a decade now. And that's been wonderful because it's allowed me to continue to hone my chops for a long time, writing both reviews and doing interview features on occasion. Um, so I'm very grateful for that. Music journalism has changed a lot in recent years, in the last decade, but I have had the wonderful opportunity to write for these sites and also for host of or a handful, I should say, of reissue labels, most of them UK based. I've done over 60 liner notes projects for various reissues, compilations, and box sets, ranging from Average White Band to Donna Summer. Those were projects for the Edsel stable of labels, to number of projects for Cherry Red based labels, including soul music, like Gwen Guthrie, Melissa Morgan, and Billy Ocean double CD remix compilation, and that was the Cherry Pop label. That was the one I did for that particular label. But box sets like the Denise Williams box set 2 years ago, that was a wonderful experience, and Sister Sledge a year before that. So these have just been awesome for me because I've gotten to learn so much about the stories behind the music by coordinating interviews with the artists and producers and songwriters, and learning about some of the ones who aren't still around from the people that worked with them that shared their memories. So this channel, Retro Rhythms, if you're still listening at this point, because this is my new welcome video, um, it has a lot of components related to what I've shared about my story as it relates to music, at least, and some of my personal story. There are some videos of me performing from over the years. Um, there are many classic interviews from the archives, both ones that I've done and ones that I enjoyed growing up that I knew people had not seen for a long time, and hopefully there's more to come of that. It does take a while to dig through the VHS tapes and transfer and figure out what people would most like to see. But from the relationships I've established with some of the artists, I know that that's appreciated, and I'm really grateful for that because that's been a great way to connect with folks as well. There's a lot of rare cuts and gems, individual songs, and some videos for songs that a lot of people didn't know they were videos for or had not seen in a long time. Of course, YouTube has expanded just phenomenally since the mid 2000s when it was birthed, and I've pretty much been doing it for about 15 years now. So, I try to come up with things that are not repetitive or reductive. So sometimes that's why it takes a little bit longer because I want to make sure that I'm sharing something that is exclusive or at least not all over the place. Um, what else? I think there's a few other things on the channel as well, but there's I should say live performances from the archives of some of the great R&B and pop artists that I have enjoyed. But it really does cover 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, and even a little bit of the 2010s. Not that much, but just a little bit. But certainly the interviews that I've done span from some of my earliest artist interviews in 1995 up to this year, 2023, when I just did my first interview feature for the website, The Urban Influencer. So, in the interest of not running on and on, I will end there, but hopefully that's informative, and it's good to share a little bit of my story. And I hope you enjoy the channel. If you're new to it, if you have been a subscriber for a while or a short time or a long time, thank you for your interest, and I'm glad that we can share the mutual love of wonderful R&B, soul, pop, and jazz music, and even more. But there's just a lot of that good stuff on here. Okay, peace out, everybody.